Welcome back to Bennett's Bike Social with me, Michael Mann, and this is episode 21 of our Better Riding series in association with Honda Motorcycles UK that brings you and me plenty of tips and advice on how to ride our motorbikes even better than we already do. But don't just take my word for it. Oh no, because back once again is our top professional motorbike coach, Mark McVeigh, an ex-MotoGP engineer, riding academy owner for over 20 years. He also invented the Moto DNA rider training technology. And Mark has taught more than 10,000 riders to be smarter and safer and more confident. And joining me from the east coast of Australia right now, here he is.
G'day, Mr. Mann. How are we doing there?
Hello, boss man. Yes, I am very well, thank you. Thank you for asking. Very well. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. I've been out on the enduro bike today for 5 hours, so I'm feeling a wee bit battered and bruised, let's say, but raring to go.
Mate, 5 hours, that's hardcore. I can last 5 minutes, I don't think. Mr. McVeigh, what are we talking about today?
Okay, yep. So we're talking about riding with a pillion, how to stay smooth, safe, and in sync.
Awesome. I have a lot of experience of being a pillion and riding with a pillion. I remember my dad's ridden for a long, long time. He's mainly responsible for why I am into motorcycling. And I remember probably early teens, me, not him. He had a CBR 600F, and I remember going on the back for the first time and asking loads of questions about what I should do. And he just said, look, just relax and enjoy the ride and hold on. Because, of course, everyone who goes on the back of a bike first time, they always think about falling off the back, don't they? I think, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to take over from the lessons here, so I'll let you carry on.
No, it's all good experience. And carrying a pillion, it's actually one of the most valuable skill builders. It really tests the rider's balance and vision and smoothness like nothing else. And of course, when you get it right, as you would have experienced firsthand, it's calm and, like a flowing partnership, I guess. But when you get it wrong, and both the rider and the pillion feel out every mistake, then that's not cool. And, at my school, Moto DNA, we actually use two-up riding on the track to teach, riders to understand grip. And we can talk a little bit about more on that later.
Yeah, I know from personal experience, when I then was riding, I did a lot of riding early on in my riding life in central London. So I kind of learnt into the deep end somewhat. And I was on a fairly big scooter, 250 scooter. But I always carried a spare helmet with me because you never know which, I don't know, mate, work colleague, whatever, person you met at the bar. Fancied a lift, and it was just a really, really good way of taking people around, and it became almost like a little communities over egg in the pudding somewhat. But it does take quite a lot to learn how to ride with a pillion and be respectful to the person on the back, but also, as the rider to interpret all the things we're bound to be talking about in this episode, but how to adjust your riding accordingly.
Yep, 100%. It's kind of like, riding with your pillion, not for them. And of course, when you carry a pillion, the goal's, not just to manage the weight, but, you kind of need to move as one balanced, kind of predictable unit, so your pillion needs to be relaxed, and they get them relaxed, they need to kind of trust you. And then naturally, mirror your movement. And if you get a pillion that's tense, they can kind of unintentionally fight the bike and the bike gets a bit wobbly. I'm sure you've experienced that. So it's really, teamwork. You kind of, the rider leads, and then the pillion kind of follows with the trust and the relaxing and sharing the same ride, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember taking my sister and on the back, and she's fairly light, and also the same experience with my wife. Again, fairly small. It's brilliant. It was like wearing a rucksack, and they were so easy. And they don't really have a lot of automotive or motorcycle awareness experience. And yet, I took a mate who was big 6 foot lad. He wasn't particularly heavy, but tall, and again was into his bikes, into his cars. But he was rigid. It was the hardest journey for me as the rider to kind of get them to relax and to understand what I needed them to do to make the whole journey better for us both. But again, maybe you can sort of talk through it. So if we have, let's say we have our pillion ready to go, what do we tell them first? Where do you start?
Yeah, well, that's 100% right. It's like kind of you need to set the foundations. And, the best thing to do is have some type of, pre-ride checklist. And so obviously both rider and pillion need to have all the right safety gear on. And then the bike setup, that needs a bit of attention. So especially rear preload for that added weight, and tire pressures, that's another one. And then, we used a CB 1000 in this rail, and checking the seat and grab rails, that's really important. So yeah, just having that briefing, and I got a bit of a reel here that kind of shows a little bit of that. So you want to hop on now, just as smooth as you can. That's it. Oh, that was pretty smooth. Jeez, mate, you're like a butterfly. You've done this before. So, communication is key. Mounting and dismounting, at the right time when the kind of rider signals, that's important. And then, telling the pillion, keep your feet on the pegs even when the bike stops. And that's obvious to you and me, but, sometimes people don't know. And then, I tell the pillion, depending on how confident they are, hold on to the grab rail or hold on to my waist, depending, on their experience, I guess. And then, relax and kind of let the bike move beneath you. And the one sort of key thing that I tell the pillions is, you should look over my shoulder. So, not move about your body so much, but more your head. And that's really important. And we'll go into a bit of a deeper dive on that. But, that simple briefing kind of prevents, most of the problems of first-time pillions, I find.
How does one understand or manage the grip of the bike, or the way that's affected, and also the sort of the stability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously having that extra weight is important to understand. And we've got a bit of a reel here with, showing that sort of tire footprint. And essentially, this is a suspension compressed, the front fork compressed. You can see that you get that extra grip. And then when the fork is extended, there's less weight and less grip on that front tire. And that's really important to understand because, as the rider kind of sits on the back, it kind of, especially if you haven't adjusted that rear preload, the bike can kind of sit up at the front. And so that extra mass, means more kind of load transfer, means more braking distance, more demand on the tires and the suspension. And then the suspension kind of moves slower. So the weight transfer takes a bit more time. So, we kind of use like a two-stage braking application where you have that initial pressure to settle the bike and then firmer as the load sort of comes forward, if that makes sense. And then when we get into
you don't want them to smash into the back of your helmet, do you? Bang! Oh, and break
exactly. We talk a bit about that shortly. And then when we get into the cornering, again, thinking about the bike balance, as the bike goes around the corner, the weight on the front, the weight on the back. And that's really important to kind of be mindful of that sort of bike balance and the difference. And of course, if we, I've got a little reel here about the sort of center of gravity of the bike. So if we play this forward a bit and zoom in, with the rider solo, the center of mass of the bike is kind of, around the middle of the bike there somewhere. But once we put the pillion on, that center of mass moves backwards and up. So that is really important to understand because that kind of makes the bike, less stable and then more prone to understeer, and kind of run wide, and you would have felt that in your experience, Michael. So the other thing that it affects, and we've spoken about this before, is the trail. So that front wheel trail. And if you remember when we spoke about this before, when you have the trail, when the forks are compressed, the trail reduces. So here it's about 80 mil. And then when the forks are extended, the trail could be, 100 mil. And of course, the trail is kind of directly linked to the roll rate of the bike. So you get a pillion sits on the back, the bike sits down at the back, sits up at the front, and that basically the trail extends, and that makes the bike slower to turn. So it wants to kind of run wide. So that's important, especially for that rear preload to set the bike up. And then other things to consider is your acceleration. Your throttle changes are magnified, so being really smooth is key. And these small differences really kind of teaches you about, how load and traction and suspension kind of all interact, never mind the pillion, and that'll kind of help your riding as a solo rider as well.
You touched on a really good point about throttle changes, of course, because if you do go for an overtake, if you do think you've still got the same amount of power as a solo rider, you don't, sometimes it's easy to forget you've got another 70, 80, 90 kilos on the back. And you're thinking, oh, I'll just flip the throttle here, and it doesn't quite go as well as you want. But Mark, tell me about a bit more about that sort of that step by step. How does that look like? How does that look in practice?
Smoothness. So we've got this little clip. So that's kind of an older bike, and it doesn't have a quick shift or anything. But starting from the basics, I've got both my feet on the ground, like you said, and holding the front brake as the pillion got on there, and you can kind of then feel that shift in balance, before you accelerate away, and just super gentle, using the clutch and throttle kind of silky. And, when you're changing gear again, letting the clutch out smooth, really important to have that acceleration nice and smooth. And I got another one here that chills. So yeah, just super smooth. Avoid being jerky. If the helmet's bump, that the rider's failed, so it's up to the rider to, and often I'll short shift as well. And then the same in reverse for braking. So we're coming down a hill in this rail, and braking into these corners, to keep the speed. So if you have a look, and you'll see how smooth that is. So we're setting up our brake pressure and then kind of building. And then, once we're exiting the corner, we'll release the brakes gently to avoid that pillion lurching. And then, downshifting, we can use a light throttle blip and engine braking as well. And then in the corner, we're kind of using a light apex so we can see through the turn, but always maintain that safety bubble, of course. And staying wide until you can kind of see the exit, so yeah, it's just about super smooth, and if the pillion's settled, then that's your cues that it's working.
I'm sure that everybody might have their own technique, but my dad would often say to me, and then I would say to anyone I carried as a pillion behind me, I would say, look, if you're uncomfortable, if you want to stop, slow down, just give me 2 taps on the right shoulder, and I'll know that you want to talk. Because sometimes, we live in an era nowadays where comms and Bluetooth and these helmet systems, you can talk to your pillion or other riders with great ease. But back in the day, it was more about the two tap on the right shoulder. But because of course we could talk a lot about the advice that we would give to the pillion as well, like how to be a pillion, and we've touched a lot about staying relaxed on a bike, but as a pillion, should you move with the bike as it goes, or perhaps either stay still, or is it just about moving the head, or what's your advice on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll run this rail. Basically, the advice that I give is the pillion should, look over the rider's shoulder, and you can see it a little bit in this video. He's looking over my shoulder, but that's kind of like the best way to do it. And this video here shows it really obvious. If I run this one through. So you can see here, the pillion's looking over my shoulder each time. And it basically, when they're moving their head, some of their body's moving too. And if it's synchronized with the bike, it kind of helps the bike turn a little bit. But then the pillion can also see, what's coming up. So that gives them, they enjoy the ride a bit more. And then they can also be, ready for what's coming up, so they can see, oh, there's a stripe bit here, and kind of relax a bit, or there's corners, okay, I need to pay a bit more attention. And that's, head movement then obviously moves its sort of torso and the upper body a little bit. And that kind of helps the bike turn, I find. And of course, it just needs to be, synchronized with the rider to help the bike turn. Otherwise, it's going to make the bike jerky. That's the key thing.
Other than not clashing helmets, are there any other cues to look out for to know that you're doing it right?
Yeah, well, it's all about the pillion, right? If they're calm, that's probably the biggest thing. They're not banging their helmet against you. The entries are smooth, and the pillion's really just relaxed. If he's nervous or she's nervous, then that's not great. But I got a bit of a cheat sheet here that we can have a bit of a look at. So obviously, if it bumps your helmet, then you're too abrupt. So you need to slow and be smooth. And not just on the throttle brakes, but also, the clutch as well. And then if the bike feels unstable, that's normally the pillion's a bit stiff or leaning incorrectly. And I've seen pillions leaning the opposite way. So it's really just to encourage them to look through the corner over your shoulder. I find that really, smooths things out. And then the rear shock, especially on small bikes, this can be a problem. There's too little preload, so you need to jack up, that rear preload to keep the bike balanced out with that weight. And then braking, the braking's harsh, and this is a big one, that sudden load transfer. So really just, being prepared, reading the road, and then setting up that initial two-stage braking and a gentle release as well, to stop the bike, the suspension rebound. And then if the pillion's nervous, it's just communication. So just, explain them what they expect before the ride. And like you said, Michael, talk to the pillion and communicate. And, if you want to say, adjust something, a tap or shout or intercom or whatever, but the smoothness fixes most problems. Exactly.
Of course, success for me would be that they want to do it again, or they get off and they remove the helmet. There's a big grin under there, and
100%.
They're not crying or want a punch in the face. Mark, you've got your own school with your own syllabus, and I know there's sort of there's three pillars involved. One of which is mind. I assume that's the one that relates the most to being a pillion or pillion riding.
Yeah, exactly. So our three pillars, as you rightly said, we got skill, craft, and mind. So yeah, the mind, it's really calm, being predictable and connected. And of course, with the rider, you can't have any ego. You're responsible for someone else's safety, so it is a big responsibility. And it's really just about being from the start when you're doing the briefing, just being deliberate and gentle. Think, a curiosity, but calm, not performance. And you want your pillion getting off, as you say. That was awesome, especially if you might hook them into riding. That happens a lot. And that state where your vision, your timing, and your traction all work together. It's really good for the rider too.
Mark, can you tell me a bit more about some of the mechanics of the bike? So we've touched a bit on it with those reels earlier on, especially with weight transfer and the center of weight. But how does it affect the tire grip specifically? We've talked a lot about weight, what's expanding the tire's surface, and a connection with the road. Does that work with this because you've got more weight? But what my question is, do tires have less grip with the pillion or more?
Yeah, that's a very popular question. And in fact, that's one of the reasons in the school that we run a 2-up bike to help riders understand grip. And I've got a bit of a clip here that can show you. So yeah, it's basically a slick shod superbike at the school, and riders get on there, and the guys that are doing this are ex-racers, so they can demonstrate what true grip feels like. And even most of our customers are road riders, so they are just blown away by how much grip. They expect the bike to slide or lose traction. They can't believe, especially in the braking, you can nearly brake harder because especially on a slick normally like when you're braking and the slick's warm, the slick won't slide when the bike's, upright. It's more when the back comes up and overtakes the front tire. That's kind of the limit of the grip. So when you've got a pillion on the back, you get more grip on there. You can nearly brake harder. So it's really, that's a massive thing, to teach about understanding grip, because, when you look at the road safety stats, it's normally survival or panic reactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The I guess riding in all sorts of different conditions on all sorts of different types of roads with different surfaces, you've always got to concentrate hard. So don't let having a pillion on the back upset that concentration or affect it. But I tell you what, talking about two-up riding on track, I many years ago when Bradley Smith, if you remember him, was racing in MotoGP.
Yep.
He's obviously the size of a pencil versus big old 6'14" and a half stone me. And I was invited to have a lap around Silverstone on the back.
No way.
It was one of those special bike, but it got that handle that you can grip onto as a pillion. So you're going around his body, and then it was on the fuel tank.
Yeah.
And I could not believe how late he braked. And it was, of course, I'm there thinking, wow, MotoGP riders are absolute gods, and this is how late they brake. And of course, he's riding at about 10% probably of what he could do, because he's got a big lump on the back. But no, incredible. So in terms of your main takeaways or your students' main takeaways from track two-up riding, I guess it's all about understanding grip, is it?
Yeah, 100%. And we do a lot of demos and drills on that. You might remember this one. There's no load on the tire as we drag it across there, and then when we put the vertical load on, then we can't drag the tire as easily because it's got so much more grip. So we can see in the stats that road riders often underestimate how much grip the tires have, and then they kind of overuse it with abrupt inputs, and like I said, in the rider crash stats, these kind of survival and panic reactions, most of the single vehicle motorbike crashes are in corners, and the amount of data that shows the rider, panicked or, didn't do anything, if they understand the grip, and again, this is just about the practice and heading towards, we talk a lot about the 10,000 hours, and obviously that's been debunked, that 10,000 hours, but it's still thousands of hours of practice and the right technique to become a good motorbike rider compared to those 20 hours or so to get your license. So the two-up ride shows them, the grip. It's not a mystery. It's a relationship between the load and the smooth inputs, I guess, of the riders. And they come away amazed, jeepers, look how far the bike can lean. The tire grips because the inputs are smooth and we don't surprise the tire. And then, that stability comes from, calm use, and it's really often a light bulb moment, and we've got that handle, like you say, that goes on the tank, so they're nice and they feel nice and secure, they can hold on.
Shall we summarize what the sort of the key takeaways of how to ride with a pillion in this episode?
Yeah, so smoothness, that's probably the key thing, and then I guess vision and and anticipation, that's important too, because that, if you're not looking far enough ahead or anticipating things, you're going to be more abrupt on the controls because it's kind of last minute. So, the grip is predictable if you kind of understand the load and, being smooth. And then the two-up riding, especially on the track, like that's just huge to understand grip. And then of course the safety bubble, that's really important to use that safety bubble, so you're prepared for anything.
Good, spectacular stuff. Always very interesting. Is there a sort of final word on pillion riding, two-up riding as they call it?
Yeah, well, it's not about performance, right? It's just about, the rider being precise, the rider having empathy, and it really reveals your habits and rewards, your smoothness, and I guess, should deepen your understanding of grip as well. So it's kind of like a win for the rider as well as the pillion when it goes nice.
And of course, if we can encourage more people into motorcycling, all the better.
Absolutely.
All right, Marky Mark, thank you very much, as always. What have we got in store for the ladies and gentlemen in the next episode?
Yeah, the next one, episode 22, we're up to. And we're going to talk about how off-road riding makes better road riders. So essentially, why BMX bandits become the best motorbike riders.
Yeah, everyone's now having a little flashback, aren't they?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. I'll let you head on and enjoy your evening, and I'll just wrap things up here.
No worries. Thanks, Michael.
Brilliant. If you've got any experience or you want to talk about tips or tricks, things we might have missed in this episode, obviously we try and keep it under half an hour. So we could talk a lot more about pillions, about advice for the rider and for the pillion themselves. But if you think there's anything key that we've missed, pop it in the comment section below. What I'll also do is I'll put a link to all of the other episodes in this Better Riding series in there too. So you can click on and get to the playlist. All right. Thank you to Mark for helping us out. Thank you to Honda Motorcycles as well for supporting the entire series. I've also got 3 more places to tell you about. I do it in every episode, and you should have got the message by now if you haven't done it already. Bike Club, Bennett's Bike Club. Come and join us. It's our own social media site, and we run it, and it's just for us. And it's a bit like Facebook, but without all the nonsense. It's just cool people all in one place talking about motorbikes. So search for Bennett's Bike Club. The second place is Facebook. We do have a private group on there. It's called Bennett's BikeSocial. Come and join us. There's about, I think, over 10,000 riders there now. And then finally, BikeSocial membership. It shouldn't be finally. It should be the priority. You can become a member free of charge if you insure your bike directly with Bennett's. You can become a member even if you don't, but it'll cost you £6 a month or £60 a year. And that gets you access to 233. I looked at it this morning. Different rewards, discounts, and all sorts of motorcycling brilliance. BikeSocial membership. Get it in your search engine. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Honda Motorcycles are supporting this series because safety is one of their key business pillars, and their quest for safety inspires their innovations in products, technology, and education, which is why they're committed to achieving 0 traffic fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide by 2050.